Welcome back. Episode 8.
Nice.
It's banging them out, man.
Keith is back.
Blocking and tackling.
I think
Cato's in the house.
I'm in the house.
the puppy dog guy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Guilted us, man. Why
Tyler-
can't I be on the podcast?
Tyler came in this morning like, am I on today or what?
Ooh.
Well, you're in blue again today, so you wore the uniform. I didn't. I'm actually buttoned up, looking pretty today for a change.
Although your shirt still has some blue in it.
I can't tell.
For
We're not
those of you
talking
that
colors,
don't know,
yeah.
Jeremy's colorblind.
Yeah.
So. Grays, blues.
I think by the way I
greens.
dress, they can tell already.
Fair enough.
So I think there's been a lot of talk about NVIDIA, AI. And I think you're starting to get to the question of, is there a bubble? Maybe,
Yep.
right? And I think last year and maybe in 2021, you got a lot of people comparing tech to the .com bubble. Obviously, 2021 was a little bit different, or the end of 2020 and into 2021 was a little bit different. But now I think you're maybe getting a little bit better of a comparison. And, I didn't live through the .com bubble, but just based on what my knowledge is of it, you had companies that, yes, they changed the technology and they gave us the internet at a quite rapid pace, but they also went and broke doing it. Right? Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, some,
quite a few.
But I think that, in my opinion, the difference between now and then is those companies back in the .com bubble, they were small. Not a lot of people probably own them. Did it hurt when those companies went and fell 90 to 100%? Absolutely. But it wasn't the majority of your portfolio probably. Yeah. Whereas now AI, the incumbents, meaning Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, NVIDIA, those make up a lot of people's portfolios. And maybe they don't go broke, but if they lose billions of dollars trying to revolutionize our technology over the next few years, or even if the sentiment around AI goes down, it's going to hurt a lot of people's portfolios. Yeah. So do you guys think that we're in this .com era type situation?
I'll start. No. Here's when we're in a bubble. When your neighbor is saying how great of an investor they are with regard to they are absolutely picking the best AI stocks every time, and you're an idiot for owning anything outside of that. We're nowhere near that. The difference between now and then is we're expensive. We are not in bubble territory, in my opinion. Markets are valued a little higher than they were before, right? We've got some exuberance around it, but are we in bubble territory? No. In my opinion, bubble territory comes when you have hundreds of companies all saying they're AI specialists and all giving you the brand new thing, and people are buying them without even having any idea what they do. If this is that bubble, I don't see it yet. So I think AI could form a bubble, but I don't think we're anywhere near what I would call bubble territory right now. But what I would say is on the other side is, if those stocks, especially since it's favored the incumbents right now, and the incumbents are very large, if those have difficulty, it's going to be hard for the markets to offset that, right? You'd have to just get so much massive performance from the other names, because these big names are so big as part of the index now, if you're just talking the S&P 500, that's tough to offset. So if people's sentiment changes around AI that, hey, this isn't an opportunity or we're not seeing it anymore, then people's portfolios are going to be hit, because a lot of people are S&P oriented and they are big parts of the S&P. What do you think, Gangl?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I don't think we're anywhere near a bubble. I mean, obviously there's some stocks that are driven like that. And obviously what Jeremy's referencing is NVIDIA, which you talked about. Now that's purely the market cap is now larger than Apple.
It's crazy, man.
Which you think about, a year ago, even if you were super bullish, and I've been bullish on AI and NVIDIA, that I would never expected that to eclipse Apple's market cap size. So I do think there'll be a little bit of, we're not in a bubble, so we're not seeing those 100 companies come public and say we're AI companies and they all of a sudden they go bust. But because the AI companies right now are these large, well-capitalized technology names, whether it's Microsoft. Again, that's just part of their business, right? So they have other parts to rely on it, but that's kind of where their growth's coming from. So that could slow, into Jeremy's point, since those big 5-6 names are about 30% of the overall market, the S&P 500. So if those would sell off a little bit, that would kind of be hard for investors to participate in an up market. So, but I don't think we're anywhere near a bubble. I do think Jeremy commented on a couple segments ago about NVIDIA being smaller, in a few years. And I think it could happen. I think it's probably a little farther out because I think this AI hype is still there and they are the leader. But you're starting to see other companies switch to like an AMD, maybe as an alternative, or some of these other chipsets. And when that happens, what's going to end up happening, the gross margins of NVIDIA is going to go from 75% down to 50%, and their earnings will go down 35-40%. And all that growth and being a cheap stock, that goes away, and the stock literally could lose a third of its value. Now, that could be 40% higher from where it is now.
That could be valued here after a 40% decline just because it keeps going up so high. Yeah, that's the hard part. Is trying to time that is ridiculous, right? You never know when that's going to happen, but at some point the memory is going to be that, oh yeah, chipsets are pretty cyclical. And people buy a lot of them, and they buy them, and then they stop buying them. You don't do that with much as with software or with the services that you're buying, right? You buy that, you pay a subscription, the subscription goes up over time. Chipsets, you buy them all because you're afraid your competitor's going to steal them from you. So you buy as much as you can as possible. And then eventually you're saying, well, I overbought and now I'm not going to buy this time around, and those margins and everything just go south. But we have no idea when that will actually occur.
You see a little sign you saw Musk and Tesla buying a little bit of chips, and he also kind of shifted out to a different company he's running. So you're starting to see little signs of that happening.
Yeah, a little bit.
Do you think we'll ever get a .com era? Like, are we going to get a influx of IPOs of AI labeled companies that may not necessarily be an AI company? Or do you think the good ones will get eaten up by the big guys, never make it to market, and the bad ones won't even have enough money to make it to market? Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think that's the next part of this, not bubble, but this phase of AI growth. We'll start seeing a lot of these small software companies, someone that can develop on top of the chipset, the services that, if you're a grocery store or whatever it is, to make your business smarter and faster, there'll be companies that it's either going to be part of a bigger company's business or the individual companies try to capitalize on that. So there'll be, and I think when that happens, that's kind of when you start getting to the end of the phase. And then a lot of those companies, these public companies, probably won't make it, just like the .com. I think that's where you start seeing that issue.
Or or their names will be Gangl.ai.
I already took that.
Trademarked by Keith Gangl.org. I don't think we'll see the influx of companies, just simply because people's goals are different with regard to prior to, in the .com area, getting IPO'd was the way to make your money. Now you can do it without it, right? You can stay in the private market for a long period of time, still make a ton of money because you're just raising capital. So I think you'll see more of that. But the influx and the fever of a bubble, if you will, I think is more pocketed now. Like, you could say meme stocks right now are a bubble, right? I mean, obviously that's a very different story about, is there actually anything there in the beginning, at all? But from that side, that's where, if you want to think about bubble formations and mania around it, that's what you should think about, is that people just justifying buying for no reason at all. And I don't think we're anywhere near there in AI yet. I don't think we know the end case, but I don't think we're anywhere near there. Where those kinds of things happen, that's when I start to get worried about a bubble, is when everybody's telling me they're an expert at picking the next AI stock. Then I'm like, okay, we're closer to the end than the beginning here.
Okay.
I don't think we're there yet.
So this is a good transition because Jeremy, you actually brought up chipsets and cyclicality.
Yeah.
But what's interesting right now is chipsets, meaning semiconductor companies, have significantly outperformed software companies, which you typically don't see, right? Because software is that recurring revenue, high margins, people pay higher multiples for them. And it's kind of, they typically lead the advancement in technology, right? So people usually hold them for quite a long time, and yes, they're swapping around, but typically they outperform other tech just because higher margins. But right now you're seeing the reverse of that. Whereas chipsets are actually, or semiconductors are actually outperforming software right now. And the amount of, and we'll say hedge funds, the amount of hedge funds actually holding, and this is usually a good barometer of where the sentiment is at on these stocks. hedge funds are now holding more semiconductors. It's at a 5-year high.
Okay.
And software is at a 5-year low.
Got it.
So it's interesting to see the reversal in the trend that of what they're buying.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious your take on that, because chipsets are so cyclical. Yes, we're in the AI golden age, if you will. But do you think that reverses course, or because you have the NVIDIAs, the AMDs that are now getting so big that now they may not be as cyclical going forward and people are okay holding on to a larger portion of semiconductors in their portfolio?
Yeah. I'll start, and Gangl, you tell me if you disagree. I think it's temporary. I think if you were to take the top list of, what's performing in the semis, it's probably very, NVIDIA is going to be a big driver of that. AMD is going to be a big driver of that, right? I think outside, if you were to take median performance, like Intel's been terrible, right, for the most part, and some of these other loser names have been, the losers of AI, if you will, have been difficult in there. And I think that space, here's how I see it, is that I think AI initially, it's like, I'm buying the world of chipsets because I need I need the horsepower, right? Eventually, I don't need the horsepower. I need to sell something to someone that's actually value add. That's where services and software come into play. And I think that's the next iteration. I think that will reverse at some point, whether it's a new company that does it or whether that's the existing companies that do it. I still think services and software is where the value ends up being. It's just that right now you're getting that outperformance because everybody's searching for horsepower. Does that make sense?
That's exactly right. And then semis in general, if you look at a long period of time, they're very cyclical, right? They typically, when the economy's doing better, a lot of chips go into different things. They do better. Same thing when the economy turns down, they do a little less well. So I think that's exactly what's going to happen right there. And so, NVIDIA, they're the leader right now, so everybody's piling into them. But I do think that's going to end at some point in time. Eventually, these chipsets get commoditized. That's the bottom line, right? So that's when the price comes down, the gross margins come down, the valuation comes down. And I think what you're seeing by, I've seen studies too, whether you're looking at software versus semis, not only just the hedge funds, but just the pure performance of them. This is like multi-years outperformance relative to software, which doesn't typically happen. I do think at some point in time we'll correct. I'm not sure. I think for the next couple of quarters, though, there's such scarcity in having that horsepower. Everybody's chasing it. You're hearing all these different conference calls. I'm sure, Jeremy, you've listened to that. All these IT budgets they're looking at AI, right?
Every dollar.
So when they're looking at AI, they're doing a little less investing in software companies. We saw that with CRM, Intuit, and stuff like that. They basically called out there's a little bit of a pause on IT budgets, but that's shifting towards AI, and I think that's where we're going. Yeah,
well, you have to remember in chips, and I think people have kind of forgotten about this, is their earnings can go from $20 to $2. I mean, it really can. I mean, that's the cyclicality we're talking about. That doesn't happen at Amazon. Well, it can happen. I guess Amazon's probably the wrong one. Microsoft, right? If Microsoft ever went from 10 to 2, people would have a panic attack. This happens in semis all the time. That's why they're cyclical, is that those earnings, you cannot rely on a straight linear line in earnings. It's usually very up and then very down very fast. And I think that cycle happens again at some point. I just don't know when.
Well, and we just went through one.
Yeah.
In 2022.
Yeah, exactly. And those things get
cycle where there was too much supply.
Yeah, and those things just get mauled when that happens. Yeah. I mean, there's no hiding from it. And so people have to be aware of that, is that I don't think any semi company completely eschews the cycle ever.
No, I one thing I would counter a little bit is the fact that the semis are at a higher pace than like a decade ago, right? Because there's chipsets and everything, right?
Yeah,
Internet of Things, right? It's connected. You go buy a stove now or a refrigerator. It's like they have a chipset now that you can connect to the Wi-Fi if you want. It's like, I don't know who's using it. Some people are, obviously, but so they are getting a bigger place in the overall economy.
I mean, hey, our washer and dryer pings us sends a text to my phone when it's done,
Nice. Does it fold it too?
Millennial alert. Millennial alert over there. Yeah, you don't have a sensor in your air fryer?
No, that's a highly, but our range is going out, so it's just like, how much do we actually use it versus the air fryer? It's just like 10 to 1, I think, one way or the other. So I think maybe we can postpone that new purchase.
Nice.
But I was looking online, and the ranges as well. They have Wi-Fi enabled. I'm like, what? Like, you really, what's it going to?
I mean, Traeger grills, right?
That's true.
You can set it, forget it, and it'll do it for you. You can look it up on your phone to see how it's cooking. You can change temp, like you can do it all from your phone.
Yeah, so
why not?
Yeah, why not? So that's my point. I think that those chips are in a lot more things. So I think they have a less of that downside. But if it's driven by AI, that's where I think you see ultimately price compression. So
Yeah.
Good. Well, I think it's also interesting when you think of your point on it's in everything, but not all semis are working. And so I also think back to 2022 when we had the downturn. Do you think, obviously, NVIDIA has always had the superior GPU, or for the most part, they've had the superior
high-end one.
Yeah. But based on their stock's performance, based on their revenues last year, or I should say a year and a half ago now, AI saved them.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
They over 100%, increase in their revenue in EPS, which is unheard of for a company that size, right?
Yeah.
So,
and so where does that come from? Like, where's the demand coming from right now? Like, is it just data storage? Is it computers? Like, what is? Give us a thought on where that demand is coming from, and how far into the future do you think that can continue?
Yeah, right now it's the big guys with the data centers, right? So it's Amazon, your Microsofts, they're Google, they're all gobbling as much chips, like Jeremy said, as they possibly can get, right? Because they're building out what they want everybody to get on to get the services. So that's why the rush is, it's like a gold rush. But at some point in time that gets, it becomes a commodity. And that's where you have to be. I still think it's a few quarters out before people really start looking at it that way. But I do think that's how it plays out.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely in the data center, because you got to figure everybody outside of the top 5, right, is probably a largely outsourced cloud type of stuff, right? And how is cloud built at the first part is extremely cheap, rip and replace, right? Now they have to put higher end chips in there because people are going to want to do AI stuff in the cloud. I think eventually that same iteration takes place, is that we'll have good enough and much cheaper, and that's where we'll go, and that's where the cycle will change. That's the pricing he's talking about. The commodity oriented around that is that we can build what we need to do for a much cheaper price if we use this chip instead of that chip. NVIDIA hasn't historically played very well there. They've tended to be like, no, we'll get the next iteration of the better chip. How much that continues to happen, I don't know.
Got it. I also saw before we came on, actually, CNBC had an interesting graphic up, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but they're talking about right now we're at ChatGPT level, right? Just general.
Yep.
Put in a prompt, it gives you an answer. In 10 years, we'll be at artificial general intelligence, which is 100 to 1,000 times more information than the human brain can have. And then in 20 years, ASI, artificial super intelligence.
Wow, we got acronyms already.
Which will, yeah. Well, that's why I caught my eye, because I was like, ASI, come on. But that'll be like 10,000 times smarter, which is pretty insane to think about in my opinion.
But hasn't that been happening already? Like, if we were to look back 5 years ago, the computing power and the ability of things to do different things that acceleration is always there. Those old stats that came out that, we're storing more data now than in the last 2 weeks than the last existence of humanity and all that stuff. That kind of stuff is always there. My thought is anybody who says 10 and 20 years out, they know what they're doing. I have heavy caution on that.
Yeah. You couldn't go back 2 years ago and predict what this AI kind of on the scene is, right? I mean, as much as I've been in the business following technology, there was no one, even on the guys that follow 5 companies, was making.
Well, it almost felt like it was overnight too.
Sure was. Also, the big guys, and then all of a sudden, to your question, who's sponsoring this? It was the big guys, and they got big budgets. They got, they're spending $100 billion in CapEx. A lot of these players. So it's like, yeah, if they increase their budgets versus the crazy. Mom and pop or smaller public companies, that doesn't do it. It's the big guys are driving the demand.
Yeah. So switching gears here, my wait what for this week was I was reading an article last night from Bloomberg, and here, let me see if I can find my quote. So the quote of the article was, Goldman Sachs Group family office clients are considering exotic options called look-back puts as a way to navigate volatility ahead of this year's U.S. election. So I would say I'm generally knowledgeable on options, right? Especially with our buffered index, dual directionals, and designed income portfolios that we have, getting more familiar with some of what you could call more exotic type options. But I saw this and I was like, I'll look back.
This is a thing?
And they used hindsight option as another term for it. And I was like, come on. So have you guys ever heard of this?
I have not. It's just I mean, but as an option, you can price out anything, whatever you want to call it, right? So if you make a prediction that, I don't know, if you take, is it the best point of the next 9 months or whatever, we have to elections, 7 months, I guess, that you get the best, you can price an option, but my guess that option's extremely expensive, and whatever you're paying for, it's probably more than offset any gain or loss you could have.
So the idea of it is that if you buy it today and you have it mature post the election, you get to, if you're trying to sell the underlying stock or index or whatever it is, from now until the end of the election, you can sell it at the best price that it was at during that time.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. If you're trying to buy it, you can buy it at the lowest price. So I was like, come on. Financial markets is just, we can create.
I've heard of it. I've never delved into it. I don't know what the product is or anything like that. I think Gangl's point is like, you can, in the options world, you can basically do anything you want, right? You can build structures any way, shape, or form you want. It's just how much it's going to cost you to do it and what you're giving up. Just remember, whenever you do something like this, that there's always another side to that, right? There's no free lunch in that, in the options world either. So understand what you're paying for it. You better understand that one real well. I don't have much other than that outside of, I'm sure there's a product out there for it, and I'm sure would take a lot of research to understand whether it's worth it or not.
And I can't imagine that if you bought that thing, that it even pays off. Like you mentioned, like
I assume that
I would imagine
the premium to pay for something like that.
Yeah, you'd have to have market volatility through the roof for it to actually give you any money back.
Yeah, the big question would be, what are you giving up?
Yeah.
What are you giving up? I have no idea. Clearly there, you'd probably be giving up something. So
it doesn't sound like a product that'd be big on volume, right? So that's the other way, you can make, right?
It's only over the counter, and so it's more.
Yeah, you mentioned family office in the quote,
specified. Right? So you and I can't go and buy.
Yeah, you can go customize. Yeah, I mean, you can go customize that kind of stuff and see what, some people would be interested in, but you're also selling to one, maybe two people, right? Instead of a flock of people that it would make a lot of sense for the broad community. I don't know about that.
When I don't know that the dynamic of the underlying, like all the different terms and actually stuff that goes in to create it, I don't even know if I would understand what the heck they're doing.
I don't know.
It'd be interesting
to see it.
It'd be interesting to look into it, but
I'm sure it's
certainly not available to us. So it probably doesn't matter.
Don't expect us to be talking.
No, not anytime soon. Yeah.
Oh man, I just thought that was interesting because we always talk about hindsight bias, and I was like, well, there you go. Now there's a product.
There it is.
Hindsight capital. We all have it, right? It's like, okay.
All right. Just to wrap this thing up. So college versus apprenticeships.
Mm-hmm.
What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I like it. Gangl, you want to start?
Yeah.
You're actively paying for it.
I'm actually, I have one that just graduated from college, but now will be going on to grad school. So that's still,
so you're still paying for it.
And I have another one that's going to be a junior in college. And then I have a son that'll be going to college. He's a junior in high school. Well, now he's a senior, I guess, as of this week. So all three in college, and they all will be going to college, so that's expense. But I'm a firm believer of apprenticeships or technical programs as well. I mean, their aptitudes are not there. But I literally was talking to someone a couple of days ago, and I said, "Oh, what's your son?" Because my son, again, is going to be a senior, so we've got a lot of friends graduating. Oh, one was going into the service, another one was a couple were going to the trade fields. And I said, fantastic.
Love it.
Whether it's being a welder or an HVAC guy. I mean, she said, "Oh yeah, the programs are a year, some are 2 years." But their pay, I mean, if Jeremy knows that he's gone through he's hiring some of these people and doing some remodeling, it's extremely expensive, and those skill sets are unique. And I mean, as much as I do myself, and you guys give me a little grief about that, I did pour some cement this weekend.
I built my house.
I was gonna say, the build house guy. I don't give you grief about it. I'm just jealous.
There's certain things that even that level person can't do that these trade schools are fantastic, especially if those kids have that aptitude for that, right? There's some kids that love hands-on. If you put them in an office, they would just shrink away. So what are your thoughts?
I am a huge apprenticeship. I advocate. You put something in front of me, you put a bill in front of me for that, to fund that kind of stuff, I'm signing it every day of the week. I just think that's an excellent way for somebody who doesn't want to do the traditional path. or for jobs that do require it now, that shouldn't require it in the future. I've had a little bit of hiring experience in my past. Like, would I hire somebody that didn't have a college degree? It'd be tough doing what we do, because there is a component of necessity that you need to kind of understand. Could you get it through an apprenticeship program? Maybe, but from the trade community and all of that, I just think it's an excellent idea. I just think that we got over our skis to a certain extent in saying, you need this. This is exactly, you need this 4-year
degree.
Yeah. I think we got way over ourselves on that. And there's a large contingent that just says, no, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that. I'd rather get paid while doing this, learning more on the job and getting skills that still relay that are going to be and to be completely honest, those are the non-outsourced skills, right? AI ain't building my deck.
No.
It's not happening. So those are the kinds of things that apprenticeship programs should absolutely advocate for. And we should be allowing people, college sophomores, college juniors that say, college doesn't feel right for me, to give them an avenue to doing something different. I'm a huge fan of them.
Well, it's also like when I started going to college, if you were in business school, it was almost like you knew that you had 6 years, because it wasn't just undergrad.
Yeah.
You knew you had to go get an MBA.
Yeah.
I think outside of business school, like MBA may not be as big of a deal, but like for I don't say my generation, millennial, I mean, for millennials, like it was almost a requirement, or at least it felt like college was a requirement, no matter what you were going to do. And I don't regret going to college. I loved going to the school that I did. And it, again, allowed me to have the job that I have today, which I don't know if you could maybe get if you didn't go to college. Right. So I don't regret it, but it's just so expensive.
Yeah.
That's the values.
If you know that you're not going to go into the field of study, because I mean, it'd be interesting to see the percentage of people that go into the exact field that they study in college. Whereas with an apprenticeship, it's usually geared towards those types of jobs, right? The trades jobs, and the chances of you going into that field are very, very high. So you kind of already know where you're going, what you're doing. You're getting paid while you're doing your apprenticeship. Yeah. And then you come out and you have a generally high paying job at that point.
Yeah.
So I just think it's interesting. And now when I talk to some of the younger folks, college isn't as big on their minds, I don't think.
Well, especially because one of the things I was thinking when you were talking about that is, I wish everybody could experience college life to a certain extent, right? And not have to pay $80,000 a year to do it. Because you get to meet people that you would probably never meet otherwise. I think there's a huge benefit in that. And I wish you could get something like that in a program that didn't require such a high cost component of it. I don't know if that exists, but that's the thing that I still think has some value in college life. But in a remote world, if you're just sitting in a computer all day and you're sitting by yourself and you're doing remote classes, I mean, I don't know. Then that part of the experience isn't there either. And so I don't know, that just seems like an isolated world to me. And I would rather, in my opinion, go do an apprenticeship and get paid for it then, right. Especially if I were somewhat, for lack of a better term, aimless, or just didn't know where my career was going, didn't know what I wanted to do. Do I really want to be dropping $50,000 a year to try to figure that out? Probably not. Then the cost of an apprenticeship, even if you quote unquote wash out, it's probably a lesser cost than the cost of 2 years of school that went nowhere.
Right. And you can maybe change your apprenticeship goal at that point too. And it's not as big of a hit.
Exactly. You learned something.
Whereas college, you change from one major to another. Maybe it tacks on another year, and all of a sudden there's an extra $50,000 that you have to.
Yeah, I just think we tack a lot of cost onto people to make that decision, and honestly, that's the time you should be.
Whoops,
that's cool. Calm me down, Tyler.
We must be coming to the end of the show.
Yeah, all right. I mean,
sorry about that.
That was like the Oscars. I'm getting played off the Oscars.
I was ready to jump in. Tyler's like, nah.
I got happy fingers over here.
Yeah. You guys got 3 college kids. It's like,
we're enough of this. Yeah. Old farts talking about apprentice.
No, college is expensive, and a lot of kids don't get the value that you're paying for it, and that's why it used to be a stigma of, if you didn't go to college, it was looked down upon. That's no longer the case, at least my perception of talking to people. And it's just like trade schools are fantastic, especially when you see what they're making is just phenomenal. There's kids that their aptitude is just not being in an office setting, is period. That's just it.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue 20 to 25%, even 30, maybe higher of kids that are just should never have that experience, that should have the traditional, a trade school apprenticeship type of experience because it fits them better. But we've told all of them that they're somewhat of a failure because they didn't do it. And I just think that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Well, with that, after I fat fingered that,
that was great.
We are officially live on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music.
Amazon.
And
what? Really?
We're everywhere, man.
I gotta get those subs. I gotta get the kids going here.
Sorry, we're not on KFan yet, or the the radio, the local AM radio station that you have.
And then
we're not there yet.
YouTube as well. So for those of you listening, hopefully you can like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.